Hi there. Whoa. Wake up. I'm about to talk. So I'm going to start with my little preliminary notes. So I hope you're all here to see Firescaping, right? If you're not, this is time to get on up and move to the next room. So for those of you that weren't here in the morning session, welcome to the 16th Annual Water Conservation Showcase. My name's Charles Bolig. I work for East Bay Municipal Utility District. Anybody been here 16 years? Come on. I mean, I have, but I don't have a choice. They pay me to be here. So the showcase is the beneficiary of the Water Conservation Showcase is the U.S. Green Building Council. And they're helping us, one of the organizers, the Northern California chapter. It's also organized and sponsored by East Bay Municipal Utility District, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, American Institute of Architectural Committee on the Environment, City of San Jose Water Resource Division, and Pacific Gas and Electric. Sorry, my housekeeping duties. So we have 35 vendors out here today supporting the showcase, so please, in between the presentations, go out and say hi and look at their wares and have conversations with them. We also have some door prizes, so there's also the, in your little brochure, there's the little raffle ticket, and there's 10 of the premium booths, so please go through and get those little stamps and then put it in the fish bowl, and then at 5:30 tonight, we've got some great raffle prizes. We've got a nice book from East Bay Mud, kind of promoting our book. Got some other bottles of wine, some really good gifts for the raffles on that. Presentation materials, just like all the other showcases recently, everything is electronic. The presentations will be matched up with the audio and presented on the waterconservationshowcase.com website in about 2 weeks. Evaluations. We'll do a Survey Monkey like we've done the last couple years. Please take the time when that email comes to you to fill it on out. There's not a lot of questions, but we really do value what your thoughts are on the presentations, things that you liked, things that you didn't like, because we certainly try to address those every year, as well as ideas for future years on the Water Conservation Showcase. So that'll be coming out about a week or so after the event. CEUs. This presentation has both the US GBC CEUs, which is self-reporting, and up behind me is the course number, so WS0015, or the IAI, and that one you have to fill out on this clipboard right here. Did I screw that up again? I've got a little dyslexia if you ever figure that out. Yeah, sorry about that. Maybe because I'm looking up on the screen and I'm reading it backwards up there behind you. I don't know. I got a lot of these challenges, but bottom line, fill out the clipboard if you want those CEUs. And I'll leave it right up here and come up afterwards. The restrooms, we've got them upstairs and downstairs, right out this room to the back walls, right next to the water station, right around the corner, or if it's upstairs, it's kind of like on this wall right here for that. I think fire exits. So from this room, we essentially have 2 exits. We've got the one that you came in this main door, then we'd head out onto the street, which is Howard, or through this back exit door, where I'm kind of pointing back here. As soon as you'd open those doors, there's some yellow stairs that jump us back down on this alley. Our meeting point is going to be the carousel on 4th and Howard. Everyone knows where that is, right? Well, you soon will if we have a fire, but hopefully we don't, knock on wood. In the event of an earthquake, so if we get a fire, we're leaving the building, we're out. If we have an earthquake, we're staying in the building, duck, cover, and hold. We all know about that for California. Don't leave the building until the building stops shaking, because oftentimes when people run out of buildings, part of buildings come down. We don't want anybody to get hit with a brick or something unfortunate like that. Lunches, please enjoy your lunches during the presentation. They're upstairs in the HVAC room. If you didn't get one, you can get one after this. Everything in there is compostable, so your napkins, your forks, the flatware, the containers themselves. So when you're done with them, please put them back by the back of the room, and we'll pick them up afterwards. Water dispensers, they're located also, I mentioned, by the bathroom and as well as upstairs. And then if you have cell phones, please remember to put them on silent right now. So our next presentation, I'll give a quick overview of Doug's bio. Doug has been gardening since he was 14 years old. Well, a little bit of dirt in your past, isn't there? He has an extensive experience on ecological landscape management. He has 2 master's degrees and participated in hundreds of landscape projects, has written 6 books, over 50 articles, and 4 statewide public educational campaigns. Doug teaches at California Polytechnic University in Paloma with the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regenerative Studies. Kent's work has been featured on Fine Gardening, Sunset Magazine, HGTV, Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, National Wildlife, and CNN. Quite impressive. So please put your hands together and welcome Doug.
God, if he scratched the surface, there's plenty of dirt in my family. But this is all about fire. So thanks for having me. You guys can hear me okay? All right, I'll try not to move my head. Does anybody know where this picture is? Yeah. Chico. It's the Witch Fire in San Diego County. We're looking at Ramona there. This is 2007. But it could be anywhere, like you said. It could be Paradise or Santa Rosa or Santa Monica or, yeah. So this is California. This is our future. Just a little, I'm going to back up and just give you a little history to show you, just to illustrate where this is coming from. I moved into Mill Valley in 1992, 5 months after the tunnel fire of 1991. That was the Oakland-Berkeley fire. 2,900 structures were destroyed, 25 lives were lost in that fire. Does anybody know how long that fire ran for? It was 10 hours. That destruction was all done in 10 hours. It still remains one of the most ferocious fires in our state's history. It no longer owns the most destructive, but no fire has done that much damage in such a little point of time. So I moved into Mill Valley in 1992, 5 months after the tunnel fire, and this was the view from my deck. This is Homestead Valley, and in the 1920s, there was a fire on Mount Tamalpais that roared down the eastern and southern edges of the flanks, roared through Mill Valley, Corte Madera, and it leveled Sausalito. The entire community was destroyed. Everybody in this valley knows that it was destroyed in the 1920s and that they were in a high fire hazard area. They all knew the risk, and yet it still remains one of the most flammable parts of our state. So as a consequence, by 1993 and 1994, I was writing gardening prescriptions for fire safety for my own neighborhood. And I started working for Fire Safe Marin and so on and so forth. And I just kept at it over the years. In 2005, this guide that was originally written for Marin County was a statewide guide. By 2010, it became a bestseller. There's actually, you cannot find them anymore. I don't even have any copies anymore. They're all sold out. But the tragedy with this is, since that book came out, I've gotten to visit every fire in California and go on the backside and work with communities that have lost livestock, lives, structures, their entire livelihood. It was an unintentional career move that has been really depressing. And it's not getting any better. It's not getting any better. I do a lot of other work. I'm not a full-time fire contractor. I do a lot of teaching and some stormwater stuff. And so you're just going to get this perspective from these 23 years of working in this industry and touring California and seeing the destruction that has happened throughout our state. So I'm just going to take you through all I've learned. The problem is California's mega fires and firestorms and fire tornadoes are now becoming common everyday practices in California. These are new terms that we now use every fire season. And there's no indication that anything is ever going to get better in California. There's two reasons for this. One is we know we're in a warming planet. California is about the warmest it's ever been in 50,000 years. We've been coming out of an ice age for about 18,000 years, and we're progressively getting warmer, which makes us more ignitable. Doesn't necessarily make us more flammable, it just makes us more ignitable. The other reason is we have 40 million residents in state and grow by 320,000 people a year. All the less flammable areas in the state are taken. So we develop in the more flammable areas, or we send our retirees into distant lands like Paradise, where they go and land. 25% of California's population is at risk of being overrun by a wildfire. So that's about 9 to 10 million people are at constant risk. But it's not just a warming planet or loads of people in our state, it's other things too. Air pollution. Every time you drive, you acidify and nitrify the soils. California's soils have gone through a dramatic change, and you'll see this at the end of the presentation. This has completely changed our patterns of fire in California. We've completely altered the hydrology. Does anybody know how many wetlands still remain in California of our original, what we had in 1800s? 4%. We have completely altered the hydrology. We're changing the chemical composition of the soils. Suppression. How about this? How many wildfires are in California every year? Anybody know? How many fires are actually started in the wild areas? Roughly somewhere between 5,000 to 8,000 fires a year. Now, it's only the big ones that ever escape, the ones they can't immediately suppress. When we go through the conclusion, I'll show you that fire used to be a very common thing in our landscape, and we have completely removed something that is as natural as tides in California. It has had a dramatic impact on our landscape. And then lastly, inaction. It's sad, and I'll go into this a little more, but compliance code with defensible space and fire codes throughout California ranges from 5 to 25% throughout the entire state. In fact, 25% was the highest I've ever found. Most of my assessments range between 10 to 15% compliance with fire code. So we have these really complex issues. It's going to be really tough to create a fire-safe California. But we'll start and we'll do it anyway. This is the 20 worst fires in the state's history. I've never had to update a document so much in my life. When I started this in 2005 with this slide, Southern California owned this list. Northern California now owns this list. The worst destructive fires are now up here, and I think it's because the landscape is going through such a radical change. It's becoming something that it was never. Of the top 10 here, 7 of the top 10 happened in the last 2 years. Of the 5 worst fires in our nation's history, California owns all 5. We are the fire state. So this is all I'm going to cover, the absolute essentials to community protection. And when I run a graduate program at Cal Poly, this is exactly the way I take my students through it. Our analysis starts on risk 5 miles before we get to the site, and we examine the roads, the ability to flee and fight. Then we look at the structure. If the structure isn't hardened, the landscape can't protect it. And then we get into the landscape, look at some other characteristics, and then what kind of community infrastructure is available to fight fires and create fire-safe communities. And then I'll just wrap up with a conclusion. So roads. Roads are it. Most people die during a fire on a road. It's statistically likely you're going to die in your car in a fire trying to flee, and it was the roads that held it up for some reason. Most evacuations are unplanned and very spontaneous and super chaotic. And this cannot be understated. 19 of the 25 people that died in the tunnel fire died on roads sitting in their cars. 3,000 degrees overran these things. Glass was wrapped around these people's bodies as the windshields melted over them. So roads is naturally the likely place because not only could these people not flee, but the emergency personnel couldn't come in and respond to the emergency. So it was a double-edged sword. They just clogged up the road. We saw this in the Camp Fire as well, the tragedy of unplanned roads. These are the characteristics of a good road. And if you live in a high fire hazard area, 25% of you do, just examine your site if you can. See if I can do this. I'm just going to wave. So anybody know the minimum federal road width for America? What the average road width should be in America? 27 is what the federal standard for road width is. The tunnel fire was averaging 12 to 15 feet in narrow. So obviously the width of the road plays a big deal. But roll-away curbs or mounded curbs, mountable curbs, where emergency personnel can easily get up the curb, drive through, and make a quick U-turn. Off-street parking is absolutely essential. If you're on a one-lane road, you need to be able to pull over and allow the emergency personnel to go down your street. This is absolutely critical. Any kind of indicator, as we saw in all the common fires, whether it was Santa Rosa or the Thomas Fire down south, is that a lot of these fires are being fought at night. And if you've ever been in a fire, you can't see even during the day. It's so obstructed. And then at night, it's even worse. So your signage needs to be just so, and there's guidelines to create signage that's visible 50 feet away in low visibility conditions. Plenty of clearance on the road as much as possible. If you live down a one-way street, firemen are under obligations, if not the law, to not go down a one-way street if they do not think they can turn around and back out in case of an emergency. So if you don't have a turnaround at the end of your street, you are not welcoming a fireman down it. And it needs to be visually apparent. They need to be able to see it when they're driving down their engines. Plenty of clearance on either side of the road. And off-street parking is probably one of the biggest things. And these are the characteristics. I've attached this list because I know you guys are going to get the presentation. You can download it, so this is just for your downloadable stuff. It's just a little more thorough than what I stammered through. This is the road I live down in Mill Valley. I did a drive along with my local Mill Valley Fire Department. They said they would never drive down this road. They asked me, they said, "Are you bonkers?" They would never do it. The road is too narrow. You only have 30 feet of forward visibility. They can't see if there's a fire or a victim or anything around that corner. There is no way they would ever drive down that. Monterey Cypress, old Monterey Cypress, or over the road, creating a fuel pathway. This was my community. They were doomed at the time. So this is just a quick characteristics of some of the characteristics. If you're living on curves, does anybody know what the minimum requirement, if you're traveling 25 miles an hour, how far should you be able to see ahead? You want firemen driving 25 miles an hour if possible. 150 feet is the federal requirement. And so if you're on a windy road, like in the Sierras or something, just create a setback from these privacy hedges to create that view around the corner. And it really helps. Again, fire personnel will not go down a street. They do not think they can actively fight and the street will save their lives. Structures. More structures are lost in California to a firebrand than direct flame contact. You look at this picture, the landscape is in perfect condition. It could handle the firebrands. You guys all know what a firebrand is? Has anybody ever been in a fire? All right, okay, some California, yeah. It's a war zone. What happens is the moisture inside of the plants gets so hot that it starts boiling inside of the plant, and it causes it to explode, these plants. And so it's like gunshots going off around you at the whole time. And then you have these helicopters flying by and these men in all these uniforms going. It is a complete war zone. It's very stressful. And what happens is when these plants explode internally and we have Santa Ana winds, they take these firebrands, these burning embers, and shoot them into the air. And then these 40 or 60 mile an hour winds throw them a mile or 2 miles ahead of the front. This is exactly what had happened here. The fire is a mile away. This is exactly how the campfire got run over. As you'll see some pictures of it, there's just devastated communities surrounded by green vegetation. That the firebrands were just constantly going a mile in front of the actual front of it and igniting. More homes are lost to firebrands than direct flame contact. So you really need to create a home that can withstand a firebrand attack. Now, these homes have to withstand this attack for weeks. I covered the Laguna Beach fire of 1994 for the LA Times. I did a 10-year review of that fire, and they had a firebrand attack that lasted like 9 days during that fire. So homes that survived were able to survive those firebrands hitting it on every side because the wind was doing a 180 throughout the entire day. So some of the characteristics of a firebrand or fire-hardened home are non-flammable siding, double-paned windows, small windows facing the high fire hazard area, low overhangs, so not a lot for those firebrands to catch up into, a low-pitched roof if possible. The higher the pitch, the more the wind and the firebrands are going to stick into those shingles. Plenty, 4 feet of navigable space around the entire structure if you're lucky enough to get a fire engine to stop at your property and fire personnel to run around and help you save your structure. They're going to be carrying ladders, equipment. No less than 4 feet of easily runnable space around your property is absolutely essential. If possible, always have water available right out where they think they're going to fight the fire. And then all these plants right here are Zone 1 or Zone 2 plants. I'll cover that. All these materials are fire resistant or fireproof. All storage is kept away from the structure, so all compost, newspapers, children's toys, seat cushions are all pulled away from the structure. And make sure that your address is super visible, which is really important for an aging population anyway. And those are the characteristics. And then this is just a list, which is, again, more thorough than what I just went through. This is the San Bernardino fire, the old fire of 2003. This is a structure that was saved. You can see a metal roof that is sloped exactly the same slope as the mountain behind it. So the winds actually never got held up on the structure. They just flowed right over it. So it didn't cause a jam or a dam for the firebrands. Look at the great space around it. Now, they didn't actually have to do grass. Diamondia, DG, gazania, yarrow would have all worked there. They didn't need grass to survive this. Look at that great turnaround spot for the fire engine. Does anybody know why it's white up here and black down here? Yeah, that means this went to ash. So what we're looking at is this is the spray pattern of their hose, that they were actually able to extinguish the fire there. This fire was actively fought. Up here, they couldn't get the hose, so that burned down to ash. Anyway, so this is a great example. And that siding looks like wood, but it's a concrete composite. It's actually not a wood, it just looks like wood. And this is just another good example of a good fire-safe entrance. Here we have double-pane windows. This is that concrete composite again. We have plenty of good lightings in critical areas. No crazy stuff stored on the outside. And look at this seam in between the concrete and the foundation. There's not a big gap there. A lot of people with shingles have that gap where the firebrands just get right up underneath that gap of that house and ignite it from there. So this just has some keen characteristics of a fire-hardened structure. Which fire? Okay. Yes, okay, sorry about that. Defensible space. This is a state law. People in a high fire or moderate fire hazard area have to do defensible space. Before the Cedar Fire of 2007, it was just 30 feet. Now it's 100 feet of defensible space is required by law. And that was our Governor Arnold who did that. And the key characteristics of this is not only should it be able to withstand intense heat and firebrands, but it has to maintain high recreational, high aesthetics. This is the area that most people use. It's actually the area that's most cluttered as well, with all kinds of ignitable debris. By far, all the research and all the observations from all these years is the first 5 feet of that defensible space that 100 feet, is the most critical. It is where a firebrand, if it produces a flame within that first 5 feet, that's where your house is going to go down. If you have some bush flaming 30 feet away, it's not as dangerous as if it's 5 feet away. So avoid any kind of storage within that first five feet of your structure. Absolutely no flammable plants. Watch out for your mulches. The recommendation is only use inorganic mulches, river rock, decomposed granite, gravel, opposed to gorilla hair, fine bark, or anything that's highly ignitable. And avoid the use of any kind of fabric. So if you have awnings, you would want metal awnings over the windows, not fabric awnings. No fabric umbrellas out there. And then even your cushions, seat cushions, are highly ignitable. And then just avoid any kind of shade structure right up against the structure. You'd want to keep a shade structure, if possible, design it 5 feet off the structure. And this is some of the reason why is with shade structures, you really want to allow as much airflow through them as possible to allow that heat and those firebrands to pass over the structure and continue on. If this shade structure was attached at all to this house, this heat and firebrands would get held up in that corner and eventually ignite that shade structure. So it's just really important to pull that stuff off the house, and then if possible, tilt your shade structure as well to allow convection, the natural rising of heat, to ventilate that area. Anybody around in 1961? No, okay. Neither was I. The Bel Air fire of 1961, it happened in LA at the time. It was the state's worst fire. 484 structures were destroyed during that time. Federal and state money flowed into Los Angeles to combat this growing problem at the time. We would be lucky to get away with just 500 structures now. And so this guy, this young graduate student, Kenneth Montgomery, what he did was he took the funding and built a huge burn chamber. And so he had flames coming up and wind going in this chamber, and then he just started throwing wet and dry plants. He threw hundreds of plants into this chamber. And it was fascinating what he came up with. This was co-sponsored by the LA Arboretum, and he came up with the very first fire plant list in the state, and it's been evolved ever since. In fact, it was the LA Arboretum that developed the zone theory, which is now a model of home site protection throughout the world. So that fire was actually really instrumental in helping the entire planet. But what Mr. Montgomery found out was you had plants that would only sizzle and wilt when they were exposed to intense heat and direct flame. Then you had other plants that would produce a flame, but then quickly extinguish themselves. So he actually developed two lists at this time, the fire retardant plant list and the fire resistant plant list, where they were resisting the effects of fire. So the fire retardant is absolutely what you want immediately around your house. Nothing that would ever produce an active flame. And then out here, you use way more the drought tolerant, deer resistant, hill holding, biological diversity encouraging plants. Some of your more resilient plants than mostly your natives are planted in from 31 feet to 100 feet out from a structure. And this is what it would sort of look like. These are all the plants that Kenneth Montgomery found that they just wilted and sizzled when exposed to intense heat. All of them are on the California Friendly Plant Guide, so they're all mostly water conserving. And then fire resistant, these are mostly native plants that have evolved to the reoccurrence of fire. They actively try to suppress it on their own body and then quickly resprout once a fire is passed, which is really essential because the #1 threat following a fire is topsoil loss, debris flows, and all that damage that follows. So holding your hill post-fire is just as critical as stopping the fire in the first place. There's some really big problems with plant lists. In fact, I never sell plant lists anymore. I have gone to too many post-fire things, and I've seen too much weird stuff that Firescaping, my book is going to be re-released at the end of summer as a national guide. And I tried to pull the plant list out of that guide, but the publisher really wanted a plant list. And I'll tell you why. Anybody remember the tunnel fire? And do you remember the Claremont Hotel, what had happened during that fire? Now, the Claremont Hotel was right in the middle of that. Yeah, it survived it. It's made of entire wood, and it's housed with wood shingles. And it survived, in partly due, does anybody know what it planted along the entire perimeter of that property? Blue gum eucalyptus. Now, at the time, everybody thought that that hotel was absolutely adamantly doomed because of those eucalyptus. But it didn't. Those eucalyptus actually saved the Claremont Hotel. They caught all the firebrands without ever igniting. The reason being is the Claremont Hotel practiced horticulture. They constantly, they did. They poodled those trees. No, they never had any dead stuff on them, and all the litter was picked up because they had planted ivy geraniums underneath them, so they were immaculately maintained. And they withstood what demolished the entire rest of the community. And so really, if a plant is too old, too diseased, pest infested, or not healthy, it is not fire retardant. It doesn't make a difference if it's on a list or not. And here's a good example. This is Santolina and Heavily bamboo. This was taken in Mill Valley. Both plants are on the fire retardant plant list. Both these plants would go up lickety-split if a firebrand hit them. So over the years, I've started evaluating plants based simply on their condition. How do they look? How much dead material do they have? What's the leaf moisture content of them? That is what really determines fire safety. It's not a name. It's not some classification I give it. It's the condition of it. I've seen junipers right up against a structure. No problem. During the Mount Vision fire of 1997, I was covering that for the Marin Independent Journal. I was looking right at a house that was all ash with green juniper on the outside. But they were young. An old juniper would have gone right up, but a baby or an adolescent juniper was able to hold its ground. Plant lists are weird, so as a professional, just really look at the condition of the plant first. And the driveway cannot absolutely be understated. As I said, I've done a couple drive-alongs with the fire department. And during an emergency, California has a policy called bump and run, where they almost assign one engine to one house, they defend it, and then move on to the next one. These people, these fire people, they're 20, 30 years old. You know, 20, 30-year-old males, they're already got a screw loose. And then you put them in a stressful environment, and they have to make decisions, you know, stressed out, hungry, lack of sleep, and they have to make a decision on which house to save or not. Your driveway is the indicator. That's what they look up to know if they're going to come in to rescue your house. What they're looking for is good clearance, a turnaround. They can see the house from it. The house is not some hidden entity behind the woods. And there's plenty of room to lay out their equipment. And then they're looking for access around. So they need an escape, they need good access, and they need great visibility. Do not underestimate your driveway in attracting firemen. You want that guy at your house. You should put out a sign, you know, free lemonade. Yeah, I think some people did. All right, small lots. This was the Tubbs fire and the Camp fire. This is the tunnel fire. It's marching down the hill. So not only are the Diablo winds blowing it down, but both radiation and convection are driving that fire down the hill. You can see a firebrand start right there. This is how the fire is actually rapidly moving down. These were all small houses. Didn't the San Francisco Chronicle last month run an article saying, oh my gosh, it's almost the same condition as it was? Anybody read that article? No, okay. This is the San Bernardino fire. Take a look at that vegetation. See anything? Yeah. Those houses were just built too close together. Houses burned between 1,800 and 2,500 degrees, which means I could feel that if it was on the street. You can't defend against that. It is just too much heat. Yeah, and the vegetation looks great. Great fire management. So the landscapers rock. That was it. This is the Tubbs fire. This is Fountain Grove, and it just, you know, it just an old community. Fire's really cleaning up our old communities right now. And then this is the campfire. This is unfortunate name for this development. It's called Kilcrease. And you can see that the fire never even, direct flame never even came into this community. It was ignited by a firebrand and then just went from lot to lot. And this is our new future. The Cedar Fire and the Witch Fire both came down into urban areas in San Diego County. So these new urban fires are becoming a lot more common. So these are some of the steps we can take. One, always have multiple access off your property. Even if you hate them, talk your neighbor into a gate. Well, Charing Cross Road in Oakland was one of the roads that had the most deaths on it that they got caught on. Those residents couldn't flee in either direction. The road was their only way off. And so really create more avenues for access when you design a house. The road cannot be your only way off. And buy good shoes. And if possible, share as much vegetation as possible. You both don't need a huge tree. One tree can shade it. Try to use as much non-flammable materials as possible. Fences become freeways for fire. We have cheap grape stake fencing on cheap cedar wood lined with old vegetation. They become incredibly flammable. But if they built with something a little more durable like cinder or wrought iron, you would get the same impact but without the fuel. If possible, always create another good turnaround, create a source of water if possible. At least if nothing else, just throw your valuables in there. Did you read in the Tubbs fire that old couple that hang out in the pool? That was fat. Oh my gosh, I would have ran back in and got a bottle or something and then jumped. That is a long wait in a pool. That was just a terrific story. And then here you really only want zone 1 and zone 2 plants. That is it. So your conifers are out in these small lots. No more cypress, junipers, pines. We're really working with more of the California-friendly, less flammable plant list. This is Mount Washington in downtown LA. It has had fires since the early 1800s. Everybody is highly aware of it here. You can see a modern structure has all the modern characteristics. You don't mind if I walk in here? Look at this. So if a firebrand came up underneath here, these are all protected. This is all stucco overhang, so there's nothing for the firebrands to stick into. Double pane windows, and they're a little small. The only flammable materials at the very top. This is a fire-hardened structure. Compared with this one, you have peeling paint, underexposed wood, lap siding is now pulling out. The fascia on the very top is not only peeling, but it's creating cracks. And these are all large single-paned windows, not able to withstand any type of intense heat. Flame lengths on this slope, which is a fairly steep slope, will easily reach 30 to 40 feet if it would ever march up that slope. The bad story here is, no matter how good this house is, it's just too close to this one. And so the road to hell is paved with good intention. The guy spent a lot of money, and he's just not going to get the result if this house goes. But slowly, we're adapting our neighborhoods and our communities to be a little more fire resistant. This is just a small lot if you're in a historic district. This is Mill Valley again, and they decided against the grape stake, but they still wanted to go cheap. So they went with the chicken wire, the livestock wire, and then just Eugenia. So it's just, and then look at this great access, though, that they're creating to lay out equipment and to welcome the firemen in. Really, you really want them. Outlying areas. This is more politics than anything. President Trump, after the Camp Fire, came out and said, oh, California had it coming because of how we manage national or state forests. And really, it doesn't make a difference what's happening in the forest. This is an urban problem. Firebrands will only travel so far. So what's really happening in the interior of these forests is irrelevant to how we create and maintain our communities. They always have to be ready to take a firebrand attack. And no amount of, whether we change our policy or not, we're always going to get a spark, always. So if we do have to manage our properties, Marin is a great example, and I know Oakland has massive amounts of lands to maintain. There's only a couple methods of actually fuel reduction. We can use grazing, herbicides, mechanical removal, or prescribed burns. That's it. Those are our only 4 options in the wildlands. Prescribed burns are kind of cool. But politically, they're suicide, and nobody will actually promote them anymore because they're a political death pill. But what it does is it tells a community they can put on their calendar, hey, fire, April 21st, what are you doing? Woo! And you can talk to your community, right? You can say, hey, did you pull in the newspapers? Did you close your blinds? Did you clean up and sweep up the dead material? It brings the issue right to the forefront where it should always be. And that's the beauty of prescribed burns. It makes the community talk about fire. And communities don't. They'd rather talk about a lot of other stuff. The real trick to this biomass is handling the biomass. More communities are struggling. They do not know what to do with this debris. Butte County is now currently looking at a biogeneration. They're hoping to power up a junior high school with the incredible amount of fuels they have in their county. But we have bioutilization. We can burn it, compost it, haul it, or landfill it. Those are our only options. So this is a matrix if you're managing wild areas. These are our 4 methods, and these are the ways to handle the debris that you create. Anybody like to taste a goat? I love goat. Goat is one of the most sustainable meats for California, and they love our hills. So I've been trying to eat more goat, and hopefully they'll eat more of our hills. But it seems logical. It's probably not working out that way, but anyway, okay, we'll get back to goats. Sorry. This wasn't supposed to be funny. It was, all right, community obligations. Oh, good, we're doing good. So this is just a quick slide. Then I take my grad students in, and we really look at the infrastructure of the community. And 1 is the roads, naturally, but 2 is communication. That was the problem in the campfire. They weren't getting the alerts because the signals couldn't penetrate some of those remote canyons. So communication is essential, but it's not just emergency alerts. It's you're communicating free chipper days or free green waste days. Or you're communicating the importance of defensible space or clearance. You just need a good, clear communication in your community. Enforcement. Firemen do not like enforcement. If they did, they'd be a policeman. And so you really have to look at what kind of enforcement you have in your community, because it really does impact the degree. 2 years ago, I live in Orange County. We had that Holy Gym fire. We only lost 4 or 5 structures. And because we have our enforcement, they're just nut jobs. They're crazy. But it paid off. We had very low destruction. Adequate water pressure. This came up in the tunnel fire. And I was talking with, yes. We go way back. Okay. I was talking with Charles about it. That's a big problem with utilities, is if they shut down power during a fire, you could be shutting down water supplies as well. So how a community manages its water pressure is really vital. Which came up in the tunnel fire is when that whole hill was knocked out, water pressure dropped. And what happens in communities is residents will turn on all their sprinklers and then flee. And you get hundreds of people doing that, and you're going to get a community-wide drop in pressure. And so we really got to look at what's your backup water, where's your main water coming from, how is it powered? A lot of communities, what are they doing in vegetation management? I know that the Oakland open space has been dynamite and very resilient in their efforts, but not every community is. Bioutilization, that's my next slide, and then pollution. I can't stress enough how much pollution is changing our environment, and if we can do anything to drop it, we'll see normal fire behavior again. And this is just, I personally believe that any community that can actively handle their biomass, their discharge from vegetation clearing, will create a fire-safe community. This is some of the ways to actively make use of this huge amount of fuels that we have in our state. We can generate compost heat. Anybody been driven on the 5 freeway lately? From Southern Cal up north, and you see those big piles with those pipes in it? Yeah, that's compost heat. They're warming water to run a turbine, and yeah, so we can use it to generate electricity and heat. We can do direct electricity generation from incineration, or we can do electricity generation from biogas. All modern landfills now are designed to capture methane. And then we can distill it in ethanol, which is really not very practical. I'm currently working with Angel City Lumber in downtown LA, and what we do is we take salvaged logs and make sellable products and then sell it to the USGBC architects and stuff to meet their local requirement. But these are just some of the ways to use the discarded biomass and turn it into a viable product. And I think there's a lot of opportunity throughout California to re-examine our waste stream. I think that would be a good challenge. And then here's the JINX. This was at the end of the road in Mill Valley. I took this shot, and everybody, so this is a lawyer right here. Everybody in this whole case, there's hundreds of homes in this picture. Everybody here knows the risk of fire, but anybody's doing it. And this phenomenon is throughout the entire state. Yeah, we know there's a risk. And so I started interviewing experts and psychiatrists. I wanted to find out what was going on. I'll show you what I found out. Oh, and this is just the Tubbs fire. This was the front page of the Press Democrat, and you can just absolutely see no 30 feet of defensible space, no clearing, no deadwood removal. There was no compliance, no care. So here's what I came up with. One, it's emotionally expensive. People that live in the Sierras or in the woods, they have a huge nature heart. And weed whacking any kind of tree that homes wrens or quails is emotionally difficult. They would rather just not do it. They think they're going to kill a bird. And so it's very difficult to clear land. It's actually emotionally difficult. It can be financially expensive, no less than $3,000 to clear per acre in the Sierra foothills right now. That's what the major contractors are charging. Not everybody, the campfire victims couldn't afford that. Not a lot of people in the Sierra foothills can afford that. It's expensive. It's socially expensive. I moved on in Mill Valley, and it was an acre property, and I started going there, and I started cleaning up, getting rid of the deadwood, and getting rid of all the invasive trees. You know, we had acacia and all kinds of stuff, and I was just cutting down trees, and the neighbors would drive by and give me the finger. I swear. They said, "You Southern Californians hate trees." I'm trying to save you. But it's not funny. I was like, oh my gosh. I don't know if you've ever been attacked by a 60-year-old woman, but it's very scary. But this is true, though. You saw this in Malibu, where this ethic of living with nature and being one with the world was just prevalent. And it was overrun and destroyed. That is nature. That is the nature, you know, our old nature. And then lastly is how we process risk. Without anybody raising their hand, please don't. Has anybody ever texted and driven? It's 3,200 Californians died last year in cars. It is by far the riskiest thing you'll ever do in your life. And it's the most riskiest thing you'll do today. But we do it so often that our perception of that risk drops and drops and drops and drops. And then all of a sudden, You get a text message from your boss, and that becomes the emergency, right? You're able to take the risk of driving and death and maiming some crazy Lime driver around here, and you're able to respond to that emergency. And what it is if, this is what the psychiatrist said, is if the risk is ever present, we shelf it to deal with immediate risk, getting the kids to work on time, getting the promotion, making sure we're at the right place at the right time, getting all the bills paid. These become the bigger emergencies, and days and months and years go by of shelving this fire, and then the flammability slowly grows. That's why we know after the tunnel fire, I had a ton of work. And then 6 years later, I didn't have anything from Oakland. And then the 10-year anniversary came up, and I had a ton of work. And 3 years after that, I didn't. So it's just how we process risk. It's really hard to keep this fire risk, which is almost ever present in our state now, in the very front of our mind. And so this is what all agencies are struggling with in creating fire-protected communities, is how to deal with these four. Now I'm just going to wrap it up. So I'm just going to go really quickly. I'm running out of time. First, California settlers came from Asia about anywhere from 13 to 15,000 years ago. They turned into their own little species, and they roamed our landscape. At the height, there was 6 million of them in our state. They actively used fire as a tool. They used it to increase the amount of grasses on our landscape, to bring up the amount of browsers, because browsers is what they hunt. They would use fire to actually drive game into canyons sometimes for slaughter. They would use fire to make traveling easier. And like us, they just started fires by accidents. Fires constantly, if you read Drake's early accounts, Cabrillo's early accounts, Richard Henry Dana's early accounts, the state was always ablaze. There was nothing to put it out. They just meandered. Then Cabrillo came, and with it the disease. He was our first European explorer, and that ushered in a whole new era. Early mid-1700s, it was the missionary era, and here we were starting to change. Anybody know how many missions were lost to wildfires in California? Zero. They avoided it. So we had the native Indians, native Californians that employed fire. They avoided it. Hard, thick, non-flammable walls, small windows. They lived inside of their compound. Outside of their compound was where they did all their work, their tanning, their milling. It was just a work. Their defensible space was work. The only mission to ever go down in a fire was a revolt, and it was San Diego's. And then in the, actually in the 1700s, Europeans started coming over en masse, and we saw the land as a commodity. That's when fire suppression started in earnest. It's because fire was taking money from us. And that's where suppression came in. So these are the three models, right? Use fire, avoid fire, suppress fire. And here we are. Anybody see that flag and just get depressed? There's no more bears here. They're long eradicated from our state. We are the 5th strongest economy, 40 million people. We drive ideas that are international. We are known internationally. It's kind of funny, just 200 years ago, we were a blip, we were nothing. And now we're this crazy megalopolis. We also lead the nation in a number of extinct, endangered, and threatened species. Another distinction that not many people tout. And this is leading us to situations like this. This map is just sort of tragedy. We can never go back to the mission eras, the Indian eras. What this is a distribution map of the black mustard. The black mustard came over with the missionaries as scurvy food, vitamin C. They could always grow their vitamin C. They planted it all over the state, but it never took a foothold. It never got on until the 1950s, which ushered in the love affair with cars. It was the sulfur and nitrous emissions that created the gateway for black mustard to overrun the state. Black mustard is just one of the weeds that lives off those emissions. We have completely changed our state, and some of us, we need to change as well. I don't think mulch and native plants are going to get us out of this. We need a more dynamic point of view now. We're 22nd century. We need to give our children a model that actually truly works. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but I'll just end with this. We need more gardeners. Gardens are great for the environment. Did you know that the more wooded a community is, the less crime they have? Direct correlation. When New York City's top cop retired, he became the president of the Arbor Day Foundation because he believed nothing he could do in America would reduce crime as much as planting trees. Public safety, the more vegetation along a street, the slower people drive, and the greater the safety for both pedestrians and cars. Energy conservation, we know vegetation around a structure keeps it cooler in the summer, dropping energy bills, and warmer in the winter. It's just great for energy conservation, as Angel City Lumber's proving that urban areas can be a source of revenue in the vegetation. Heart health, did you know people in gardens have lower blood pressure and lower heart rates than people not in gardens? We just feel better in gardens. Learning, kids with views of vegetation have higher memory retention than kids that don't. Plants are essential. It's an evolutionary biological link that's hardwired. Well-being, certain types of landscapes can reduce depression and increase feelings of well-being. They tested all kinds of people, and people just feel better about themselves in a garden, opposed to this. You can tell, I'm not feeling so good right now. I'm kind of panicky, actually. This was kind of interesting. Patients with views of vegetation outside of their window were discharged earlier than patients without. Now, this research didn't say that the patients were healed. They just said they were discharged. I'm assuming they just... So if you want to cut your hospital bills, get a good view. And then this is lastly, if you're a beer drinker, this is a good news. Do you know how much longer gardeners live than non-gardeners? 14 years. It's the bacteria in the soil. This was the big kick to get food gardens on K through 12 gardens. 12 schools, is to get their kids' hands into the soil and inoculate them, to give them the beneficial microbes that would help with their development. That's why urban kids have higher rates of asthma than rural kids. It's because of the bacteria. These are the reasons we need to prioritize landscaping. And the more we prioritize the value of landscaping, the less flammable our communities are going to be. So that is, I think, where I'm going to end. Yes, okay. And lastly, for the agency folks here, I'm just going to show, this is a California-friendly maintenance book for California-friendly plants. It was funded by a first ever collaboration from Metropolitan Water District, Southern California Gas, and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. It's absolutely free. Nothing in this book was copyrighted. So if you're an agency folk or if you're looking for material to give to your clients, you can just cut and paste, take anything out of this book and distribute it. So I brought free 4 copies, but anyway, I just wanted to make sure that this was a resource for landscapers and public agencies. But both LA Times and Sunset Magazine said it was a must-have for California gardeners. So it's really a comprehensive guide. That's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have time for a few questions. I'll run around with microphones.
You're welcome. That was okay?
Thank you. How do different communities enforce the state law for defensible space?
Well, that's a two thing is one you have the fire department and the other one you have the neighbor, right? So we have 2 forms of enforcement. The neighbors can actually call in to have inspector come over and cite the property, which is where we are. It's been my experience that fire people are really reluctant enforcers. So I'm not, that's a really good question, but I know if you care about your community, you can call in your neighbor to have the inspector come in. That was a good question. I wish I knew the answer.
Thank you for your talk, Douglas. My question has to do with the future of building. We're going to be building multi-dwelling buildings and with more density. Yeah. So what do you propose we do when we have less space between structures and less room to plant for defensible space and for the right plants?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think those really dense housing units, mixed-use housing units, are inherently incredibly less flammable. They're built by the latest codes. Our newest governor is going to ramp up the building codes for fire protection. So you're going to see that every building in California is going to have double pane windows, non-flammable siding, type A roofs. So we're already seeing it. We saw it in Mount Washington, that one picture. You're going to see it all throughout the California. I think Gavin Newsom is going to respond aggressively after both the camp and the tub fire. I know that didn't quite answer your question, but I think the building codes are going to come down so heavily that there just won't be flammable. They'll be able to survive.
You have the IoT sensor for which detect forest fires. So why still it cannot prevent such a widespread of forest fires? It has been quite some time for this. I mean the IoT. I mean the technology in detecting forest fire.
What was the question?
Internet of Things. Can you say that one more time? The question, was it Internet of Technology for fires?
Yes, the IoT technology. I mean the sensor in detecting the forest fires has been for some times already. Why it is not? I mean, fully utilized. I mean, in the prevention. Yeah.
I apologize. I have no information on that system. I have no experience in it. I should just go. I'm sorry. I'm unable to answer that question. I apologize.
Hi, Douglas.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for your talk. I'm very interested in the human nature part of this equation.
Yeah.
And you talked about process risk, which I have not heard exactly explained until today. The Mount Washington slide, the homeowner on the left, how do we get them activated? And, that is the biggest challenge, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
What do we do about the homeowner who cannot, will not, act on the community's benefit?
California loves private property. We defend it at all costs constitutionally, and the best you can do is a plate of cookies, be really conciliatory, and if that doesn't work, then you've just got to call the fire marshal in.
And what if you're an enforcer?
Well, so if you're an enforcer and you cite them and they don't do anything, you get the work done and put a lien on their house, which is how California now operates. Yeah, right. So it's you're. Yeah, hopefully, but you've seen it across California. There's a lot of, we're entering an elderly population. People just don't have the means to spend the thousands and thousands that they used to have. And so we have to go through this change and this evolution of our housing stock. And right, and you notice all these destructive fires are only taking out old neighborhoods. So anything built post-1990s is not really being destroyed anymore. So we're actually, it's like getting, new skin. We're getting a new California as these fires clean out the 1960s, 1950s communities.
Even over time, we are getting better. I mean,
Yeah.
Look at the great fires of the old days, we are getting safer.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
Over the whole time frame?
No, it's everything every trajectory is getting worse.
For
Yeah.
California.
Yeah, actually for the whole nation. This is, so Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, New Mexico, Arizona, Tennessee set records, Florida set records. Alaska set records 2 years ago with number of acres burned. So no, this is, Spain, remember, even Russia 2 years ago. Didn't they shut down air travel because the Russian fires were so bad? Right,
One thing I was hearing from the firefighters during these storms is that they've never seen anything like it, and it's because the wind was coming from all directions. Where they used to be able to fight it in a line,
Right.
they couldn't, and they even became overcome by it. And the other thing I heard from listening to the firefighters is they said most of the houses they lost were because of wood decks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all the Sierra's foothills. That's Grass Valley, Rough and Ready, Marysville. Yeah, they take these old trailers, push wood decks right up against them, throw a shade structure on. Yeah, I don't know how they're able to get fire insurance, but yeah.
I can personally second the notion that firefighters don't like to be enforcers and that people don't like to comply. My question is, I heard that in the Woolsey fire there was a bunch of homes built to new codes that still burned. And is that because the codes were inadequate still, or is because they had flammable things right next to them?
From my understanding, it was flammable things right next to it. That's come up before. I gave a talk a month ago, and that came up exactly. So it was poor maintenance and, from my understanding, flammable things right next to it. Yeah, and in fact, that happened in Santa Rosa with the Tubbs fire too. They had just finished the home 9 months before they lost it, and it was compliant too. Yeah. But those are the exception, not the rule, though. You know,
So
those are the exception.
So question, in a neighborhood, how do you get an assessment? Like, can you have the fire department come in and assess your neighborhood?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you may want to get a variety of assessments, right? You may want to get an arborist to provide an assessment, the condition of the trees and the likelihood of them surviving a fire. Because firemen, it turns out, they're not very horticultural oriented. Good guys, they got the nuts and bolts of it. So you may want to pull in a variety of professionals. Yeah, but definitely start with the fire. They know, I mean, the firemen, they know defensible space, and they know the wood decking and the eaves and all that stuff, yeah. And then I would get an arborist or a real landscape architect or something.
I was reading after the latest fires and the call by our dear president to basically cut down all the trees.
Yeah.
That it's the opposite. We have to go back to the old fires and let these things burn well and get rid of, I mean, manage the forest very differently from what we've been doing.
Right.
Can you comment on that?
No, you know, that's, it's real political. This is just, all modern fights are now against environmentalists. And there's two sides to this environmental story. Because if we just let it burn, then we're losing all that carbon, right? And we're in a carbon thing, and then there's the public health crisis due to the particulates and the hydrocarbons. So I'm gonna stick with urban. That's a really good question. I intentionally kept out of the federal lands because of that.
Because the studies show that the trees come back better.
Oh, absolutely. So many benefits with prescribed burns, but with 40 million in states, it's just more complicated now.
Quick question. Thanks
Yes,
for the
sir.
talk. It's really interesting. You were mentioning earlier about this becoming an issue, not just in California, but East Coast and
Yeah.
Alaska and other places. And I know that it seems like the kind of the measure of how destructive a fire is a few things. There's, you know, deaths, structures burned, but also acreage.
Yeah.
In the other areas, say Alaska or the Carolinas, are we measuring it off the same thing? Is it structures burned, or in different states are we finding that it's actually more acreage burned? Like are we typically kind of using the same base? Like are we measuring the destructiveness of these fires based on the same thing in these other regions?
That's I normally try to take only dumb questions, and there's been like a run of really good questions. So I'm really used to working with college students. So I'm sorry, I'm ill prepared for this. No, that is actually a good question. It's acreage. Right now they're measuring it in acreage, and that's a really good question because it's a poor measure because all the West Coast is going to burn at some point. So the amount of acres is kind of irrelevant if it's all going to burn. So what it burns and the damage it does, and if it springs back, and the amount of topsoil loss that we experienced following the fire, are really the core key measures. Now, Canada did lose 500 structures 2 years ago. So we're seeing structure loss, but they can't compare to California's state of loss. I think that's a really good question. I've gotten in a lot of fights with, I don't think the amount of acres burned is really a relevant measure.
It's only tragic if people are involved.
Yeah, right, because nature
will take care of itself.
right, and she's done a wonderful job.
Thank you again for the presentation. I know that a lot of what's been covered is with regards to residential construction and mostly out in remote neighborhoods. I was wondering if you had any special considerations for commercial buildings that, you know, exist on college campuses or standalone buildings out in a corporate office park or anything like that.
Absolutely, I do. I worked with the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden 3 years before they were overrun and lost half their property. And when I did an assessment for this botanic garden, I said, you have a community obligation to be a refuge during a fire. You're a community asset. And they weren't. They couldn't be. I think commercial properties owe it to their community to provide their parking lot available for emergency personnel or fleeing people. If you saw the Tubbs fire, you saw Target, their store was lined with shingles. You know, it's not a refuge, and I think if you're going to profit in a community, you owe an obligation to the community to be a safe haven. And so I think, you know, they should be maintained. It's really about maintenance. Maintenance is the fulcrum of fire safety, without a doubt, and it's not just design, but that's just my feeling. We flee, right? We flee to Kmart. We flee to all these commercial centers during emergencies, and it's like an obligation now that they have become part of the emergency response system. So that's a really good question. I don't think they owe us, but I don't know how to phrase that. Very good. Can we do a light one, easy one?
Okay, you're on. Don't mess it up.
Okay. How do you address the inherent conflict between the desire for like a canopy of trees in an urban landscape and the kind of fire safe distances you're talking about?
Excellent. So all of your... Oh, okay. Yeah. I was hoping for my name or something, but Europe is, they clear cut all their forests centuries ago, and so all their public lands are now managed for timber. And so they can do dual things. They can have high recreation, high aesthetic value, and still pull off a crop. Now, if we manage our urban vegetation as a crop, our crop is we're getting urban cooling, we're getting public health, we're getting stormwater management, and at its end of its life, we're getting timber. And if we see our urban areas as a crop and something to really harvest from, then flammability would drop as a consequence. And so Angel City and I are really actually working on trying to get LA County to plant trees with a removal rate of 15 years. And then a company would come in there and start making flooring and some of the essential resources that the community needs. But if we put these trees on a constant replacement basis, it would be a very dynamic community, but they would never grow old enough to become flammable. So if we keep our harvestable qualities, the reasons why we planted the trees in the first place, in the forefront of our mind, we would be the first to remove them as soon as they pose a risk. And so we are so emotional about trees. We protest if they come down. And yet we really need to be this agent of change. We need to be fires in our urban areas. And one of the ways to do it is to almost commodify the urban vegetation. Give it a harvestable quality that then we can constantly harvest. And I didn't even come close to that one, did I? Did that help? Okay.
So everything that you've brought up always comes back to money, it seems. It's very costly to implement these things. And is there any, are you aware, or is there any subsidization available? I mean, what can people do besides, potential rebates? If you replant your trees every 15 years, that's an increased cost of home ownership.
Very poignant question, because the federal government is looking at California. FEMA is spending billions on places like us. Back in the 90s, I was working with Firescaping Marin. We tried to get FEMA to fund fire prevention work so they didn't have to pay for the consequences. And so we just need to change our philosophy. It would be the same amount of money we spend. We just need to spend it before the disaster and not after. But there's other communities, like some communities offer free chipper days, where they'll put a chipper in front of your house, and that's funded through a state FireWise program. You're going to see a lot more programs coming into these lower economic communities to help them out with their fuels and their roofs and those fences and stuff. I think we're going to see some of that, because we know that prevention pays better than the mitigation that follows. That's a really good question.
A couple of years ago, when we were still in the midst of a drought, a friend that had a country property that was filled with dry grass and needed to cut it back was going to hire a ride-around mower, but they said that can start a fire if you hit a rock or something. And I had the brilliant idea, like you, to hire goats, a herd of goats, and eat it, except it costs $5,000. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really only for cities. And goats don't eat grass. It's sheep that eat grass. Yeah,
Well,
so you-
whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so you would have paid $5,000 and they just would have yawned.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so the goat people are the Sierras. Laguna Beach is goat. Malibu's now thinking goat. But they're very expensive to maintain and operate. Yeah.
Yeah, you already mentioned prevention is better. I mean, as I mentioned before, the IoT in fire detection technology. Well, even Europe, they are using this. I mean, for the prevention, and then California is a state which produce technology. So I don't understand why you say you never know about this or heard of this technology.
To my perspective, it doesn't make a difference. You're either prepared or you're not, right? We live with fire danger 9 months of the year. It doesn't make a difference if there's actually an active fire. If there was, would you run up to your roof and sweep it or change your roof or get rid of your shade structure? I'm not too sure. I'll do some research. How's that? I'll do some research. I'm a little embarrassed. I really, I owe it to you to look that up. I apologize.
Hi, just a quick follow-up to the question about the desire of some property owners or communities to maintain tree canopy cover. What I was going to suggest, your slide that lists those 4 obstacles for creating defensible, the emotional and psychological.
Yeah, the barriers, right.
Is the regulatory realities. So I live in urban wildland interface, Woodacre and Marin, which you probably know well.
Yeah.
We have streams that contain endangered coho salmon, and all of Marin has a stream conservation area setback ordinance. So we're actually not even allowed to remove a riparian tree.
Right.
And a lot of the riparian trees in our area are California Bay laurels, which are pyrophytic.
Right.
They also run up the stream channels that tend to go directly up gradient, up slope to ridges. And in a fire situation, those turned into fire ladders.
They're chimneys, right?
Yeah, chimneys.
Yeah.
That just shoot the fire up an entire wooded slope like crazy. So there's an inherent obstacle in that legislation that, of course, is designed to protect the ecology of the stream corridor and network, but it also prevents somebody who owns property that happens to have a setback that extends into their property from doing proper fire management.
Thank you. That wasn't even a question. That was great. I just sat there and nodded. No, I appreciate that. You're absolutely, like I said, it's all arguments now are against environmentalists. And wow, how you handle that is extraordinary. I'd love to learn from your experiences.
Okay, so before you put your hands together one more time for Doug. Okay, go ahead. Let the clappers happen. Woo! AIA, so I got that correct. Please fill it on out. And there's still quite a few lunches upstairs, so those of you that didn't grab a lunch, please go upstairs to the HVAC room up the stairs in the corner here and have yourself a first lunch or a second lunch. So see you in about 30 minutes.